happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm, and welcome to...
I'm Corey Johnson. So happy to be here.
Back being a co-host again. Corey Johnson, folks, is the Speaker of the New York City Council, second most powerful elected official in New York, and we're honored to have you.
I love being here. Though I miss Ann Northrop, but I'm only here when she's not here because you never take a day off.
No, I'd be happy to. We'll let you do the show with Ann. That'd be fun. Well, let's go right to the news. We'll catch up.
Yes.
But let's tell them what the headlines are, first of all. We're going to give you the gay and lesbian angles on the Kavanaugh nomination.
The Trump outrages continue, including a trade bill that will spike your medical costs.
That's not nice. Congress actually got rid of an anti-LGBT amendment in conference on a bill.
And a record number of LGBT candidates are running this November all across the country for office.
Right. Now, a gay man who had a commitment ceremony with a man in 2003 and broke up with him is told by the court that they were married and he had to pay a divorce settlement.
But they weren't legally married.
That according to we'll get into it.
What happens when a teacher comes out in Zimbabwe it is not good?
No. And HIV rates for young men who have sex with men increased 3% annually over the last 8 years in the United States, and we'll talk about all the implications of that. But welcome, Corey Johnson, my council member.
Yes.
In Chelsea.
Yes.
And since last we met, you've become the Speaker of the Council. What do you want to say about how that's been for you?
Well, it's great. It's an honor and a privilege, and I was elected to the council in 2013, so I served for 4 years, and then I ran for Speaker, and it worked out, and I really love the job because I get to help New Yorkers every single day. It is an honor and privilege to serve in this position in the city that I love. And, I say this all the time, but I really stand on the shoulders of all of the activists like you, Andy, and Ann Northrop and other folks who really paved the way and let it be possible.
But you have been out since you were a teenager.
Yes.
In high school. You were very famous as a high school football player in Massachusetts, and you were on the front page of the Times with that. And we've known each other since you were about 19.
Yes.
Right, and in politics, and so you're and how old are you now?
36.
You could be president
36.
now,
I don't know about that. But we have to get rid of this guy.
We do. And before we move on, in terms of the LGBT community, what are you sort of most proud of having been able to accomplish as Speaker? Besides your example.
Well, you just mentioned in the final headline about HIV transmission rates across the country increasing, but in New York City, last year we had the lowest number ever recorded of new HIV infections, and that's because of a lot of really important work that the City Council and the Mayor's office and the Governor and the state legislature have done, innovative ways to really ensure that people don't get infected and to treat people who are infected. So I'm the only openly HIV positive elected official in the state of New York, and that makes me really proud that we're doing so much on that. And then I think New York City has been a real leader on issues for the transgender community. I passed a bill a few years ago allowing transgender people to change their birth certificate to accurately reflect who they are.
There it is in the New York Times.
Yes.
You can mark an X now on your birth certificate. You can get it changed and do that. That was the mayor said he was going to sign it, or he did sign it?
Yes.
Mayor de Blasio?
And I passed an original bill 3 years ago, but we came back and made it even more expansive, and that's what the Times story is about.
Now, for people's edification, you were also known as the Dancing Speaker. Here you are at the Pride Parade with the Public Advocate of New York, Tish James.
Here we go.
There he is. I don't know where you get the energy. But there you do this all the way up and down the street.
That was a hot day,
Yes.
and Tish and I had a great time. She's going to be our next Attorney General, our current public advocate. And you know what?
She is the Democratic nominee for public advocate, and she was
For Attorney General.
For Attorney General, right? She is the public advocate now. Yes.
You know what? What I have learned in almost 5 years in office is I think one of the most important things for an elected official and for anyone is be yourself. Just be yourself. I like to dance. I'm going to dance.
Right.
I like to lip sync to Lady Gaga. Sometimes I'm going to do that.
Okay.
You have to be yourself, and I think that it's important in these times we're living in that there's a level of authenticity that people get to see, and not in the crazy manufactured, vile way that the president shows us every day, but in a real way. And I try to do that as an elected official.
Okay. Now, you also spoke at DragCon, RuPaul's Drag
Yes.
Con, a drag convention.
Yes.
You were on the political panel. There you are with Michelle Visage. Do we have that picture?
I love her.
Who's on RuPaul's Drag Race. Now, what did you talk about there on the political panel?
It was mostly a panel to talk about how to be politically engaged, and what the audience was predominantly young people who were in their 20s, who many of whom, not all, but many of whom have not been involved in political campaigns, and their memory doesn't date back to the Obama 2008 campaign when a lot of young people got activated 10 years ago. They were too young for that then. And so their real memory is now dealing with this Trump presidency over 2 years and feeling angry. And the message we tried to give is how to get active and engaged, how citizens can make a difference, and all of the important elections in New York State with the New York State Senate and in House races in the tri-state area that we need to flip to have a Congress and a state Senate in Albany that have a progressive Democratic majority.
And maybe even a U.S. Senate if there was a real blue wave.
Yes.
Okay. And you've been very involved with knocking off these rogue Democrats in the Independent Democratic Conference who were betraying the party. You made that move this year and did that.
I'm really proud. You had 8 Democrats who were collaborating with the Republicans for 7.5 years, allowing them to stay in power, led by Jeff Klein, who was the IDC leader
in the Bronx.
In the Bronx, and I supported all 8 challengers, and we beat 6 out of the 8.
It was the happiest thing that happened.
It was so good.
The election.
And it's going to be good for New York State.
Okay. So your hopes for turning the New York State Senate true blue?
I'm making the prediction here. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
We need 1 seat to flip to have a Democratic majority. I'm calling here on Gay USA, 30-odd days out from the election, we're going to flip 5 seats.
Wow.
That's my guess.
Okay.
5 seats.
We'll run this tape in a couple of weeks.
I think the tsunami is coming.
Okay. All right. Well, the tsunami of the past week has been the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. I mean, what an ugly week for America.
Last Thursday, when the testimony occurred with Dr. Ford in the morning and then Kavanaugh in the afternoon and evening, I was watching it intermittently, and I felt so sick, physically ill by watching what was occurring.
I was very moved by her. I was in tears actually watching her.
She was incredible, but it was interesting. You had that prosecutor from Arizona who they called in to ask her questions.
Yeah.
They couldn't ask her any questions.
Right.
But then when it came to Kavanaugh, they asked him the questions.
Well, they started off with her and they didn't like where it was going.
And exactly. Lindsey Graham tried to turn the tide because they didn't like the way it was going. I think it was a dark moment in America, a bad moment in our history, and I'm really scared that he's going to get confirmed. I'm afraid that Senators Flake, Murkowski, and Collins are not going to step up and do the right thing.
Well, Republicans have violated all kinds of norms. They turned the court into an 8-member court. For the last year of the Obama administration, they wouldn't even hear Merrick Garland. I think Democrats are going to have to, I've been saying this, I'm not just saying this to you, but I think Democrats are going to have to break some norms too. The number 9 is not in the Constitution. It just says that they serve life terms. They started off with 6. They added some, they took some away in the 19th century. It's been 9 since 1869, but it was 8 in 2016. So it could be 10, it could be 11. We could have a larger court, more reflective of our country, but Democrats are going to have to step up and say, we can change things too.
Yeah, and I guess looking back, I'm not sure that it was the right move to get rid of the filibuster rule for judicial nominations at the circuit court. I don't know if it was the right move.
Well, we got rid of them on the circuit courts. This is
and they did it for the Supreme Court.
They did it for the Supreme Court, but we couldn't get anybody through. I mean, there were 100 vacancies as it was when Trump took power, and he's stacking the courts with these right-wing nuts. But we can rebalance the court. I mean, certainly the Congress and the new president in 2021 are entitled to expand the judiciary, have more circuits, have more judges, and rebalance things. But they could do it to the Supreme Court too. I just think it leaves people with despair to say, there's nothing we can do for the next generation. We're not going to be protected by the courts. Well, that's not true.
Our Congressman Jerry Nadler, was on this week with George Stephanopoulos on Sunday.
And he may be the head of the Judiciary Committee if we turn the Congress blue.
Which I think we will take the House, and I think that he will be the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And George Stephanopoulos asked him on Sunday morning if Kavanaugh is confirmed and is an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and these allegations are still out there, right, and you don't believe the FBI has done a fulsome investigation to determine whether or not they're true and to get all the information that you need, would the House Judiciary Committee investigate this even further and look into it? And he said, yes, we would have to. We can't have someone who potentially committed multiple acts of sexual misconduct on the Supreme Court of the United States.
And perjured himself in his hearings multiple times.
He lied so many times. And
he's not a very good liar.
The Washington Post and the New York Times outlined every single lie he told.
I guess that's what Trump admires in him.
Do you think he gets confirmed?
I heard Jeff. We're taping on Wednesday. I heard Jeff Flake this morning on the Today Show, and we're going to talk about that. But he was, he didn't sound too firm as he did maybe earlier, where he said we can't have this kind of partisanship on the court. That's already been demonstrated, so we ought to vote against him. Jeff Flake hasn't come through for us on almost any of these votes on judges.
I don't know a single vote that Jeff Flake has gone against Mitch McConnell and President Trump.
But the only reason we had any kind of investigation, and it looks like it was a sham, was because 2 women got in the elevator with them, and one of them was Anna Maria Archila, who we know, out lesbian, who was the head of the. There she is. She with a woman named
Maria Gallagher.
Maria Gallagher. They didn't even know each other, and they confronted him and said, "We are survivors of sexual abuse." Anna Maria had to text her father after that because she hadn't come out about it. And she said, "Dad, I didn't, I never told you about this." Her father wrote back, "I'm sorry I couldn't have protected you." It's quite moving. And so, that's Anna Maria talking right there. And she did a terrific job. And after that, Flake did say, well, we have to have some kind of investigation. But it turns out not to be a thorough investigation.
You know what that moment really shows me? Even if it ends up that he gets confirmed, I think more truth has come out in the intervening week since they were able to stop pushing it through that day. What it shows to me is that activism matters and works.
Yes.
Maybe not every single time, maybe not every single instance, but it makes a difference. And to see those 2 brave women stand there and go at Jeff Flake and tell their personal stories. I loved it when that woman, Maria Gallagher, said, "Look at me in the eye. Look at me when I tell you my story."
Right.
I think it was very, very powerful.
Right.
And he had just said an hour before that, he put out a statement saying he was going to vote to confirm. And then when he went into the Judiciary Committee hearing, when they went to him and they said it was his turn to speak, he waved them off. And then Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, his friend, makes a speech about how this is bad for the institution. Right. He gets up and leaves, and when he comes back, he says, this is tearing the country apart and the Senate apart, which we knew. But I think that moment right there, those 2 brave women really made a difference that day. And if they had not done that, if they had not been chasing him out of his office to those elevators, Kavanaugh might have been confirmed already.
Already. And we have friends from New York, a lot of them are AIDS activists and LGBT activists who've been going down every week and getting arrested every week in Washington. I don't have that kind of energy, but well, anyway, there's also another gay angle. His former roommate, who was gay, I think it was at Yale, yes, he said Kavanaugh barely spoke to me, but he said the bathroom was frequently a wash and vomit that Brett did not clean up. That was one of the angles this week on the story. Kellyanne Conway comes out about having been sexually abused and then yet still stands by this character. Well, it's just, well, let's move on. Let's talk about Trump. What a week for him. Now, here in New York, he's being investigated for what the New York Times exposed as his tax evasion all these years. The whole family, including the sister, is a federal judge. I mean, what I have to say, though, Corey, is I read these stories. These crimes have been going on for decades.
Yes.
Where was the New York State Attorney General, whoever it was, the Manhattan DA, whoever it was, the New York Tax Department, where were these, why weren't they on them? Were they just too happy with the campaign contributions?
Well, the Times said in the opening of this gigantic story that they've worked on for 18 months that reveals all of this, they said that even their own coverage over the years was
fawning.
Yes, very fawning, and they named journalists who weren't fawning, like
Wayne Barrett
and other folks.
Of the Village Voice.
Yes, who went after Trump and talked about this for years. It really shows, I think, in a much bigger way, and we're seeing this with this criminal justice reform movement all across the country, is that there's not one criminal justice system. Right. There's a criminal justice system for the white, the rich, the privileged, and the famous. And there's a criminal justice system for everyone else, black and brown people, people of color, people who are poor, people who are LGBT, people who are disenfranchised and vulnerable and marginalized. They are held to a different standard than the rich. You look at what happens on Rikers Island in New York City.
The jail.
More than 80% of the people there are held pre-trial because they can't afford bail. Then you look at someone like Harvey.
But you've done something about that.
We're working on that, but then you look at someone like Harvey Weinstein, who gets able to afford the most expensive attorney in the world, pays, puts up bail, and never steps foot on Rikers Island, gets out right away. What this shows is that Trump was able to game the system. And during his campaign in 2016, he talked about how the system was rigged against the American people, and they should vote for him so he could drain the swamp and stand up for everyday Americans. We know that was a lie. What really happened was the system was rigged for years and years and years in favor of President Trump and his cronies and his family members.
Sure, absolutely. And his denigration of women this week, the reporter.
Oh, the reporter at the White House.
It was just, and they tried to change the word again, we can't gloss over these things. We can't let these things slide. His declaration of love for Kim Jong-un.
Could you imagine if any Democrat had said that? Could you imagine if Barack Obama said what he said about a dictator from North Korea who has starved his people, put them in basically hard labor camps, tortured them, and is playing around with nukes? And President Obama or Hillary Clinton, if they had said something like that about a dictator? But this guy says it about Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, the list goes on.
So, and this is something I ask all guest co-hosts, because Ann and I talk about this stuff every week, but, how are you, surviving in this era, and what do you have to say about it, and do you think we can turn it around? Or do we need a whole new system in this country, as the Declaration of Independence exhorts us to do?
I feel hopeful. It's a little counterintuitive.
Tell people why.
The reason why I feel hopeful is I really, really believe that all of the horrific, terrible, regressive things that are happening across the country, and people are suffering, and there has been basically incalculable suffering since this man took over. I still believe that we are going to take back the House, we're going to take back state legislatures, and you've seen people get involved in politics in a way they've never gotten involved before. And I think you have a movement. And if you look, I say this all the time, if you look at every modern civil rights movement in American history, whether it be the women's suffrage movement up at Seneca Falls, or the African American civil rights movement in the South, or the farm workers movement, or the LGBTQ civil rights movement, or the anti-Vietnam War movement, all those movements were led by people in dark, horrible, dangerous times. This country somehow was able to make it through slavery, which is the biggest stain in our country ever, and we still have way too much racial injustice.
But I feel like the Civil War is not even over. I mean, and they're winning now. That crowd is like in power now.
Well, that's true.
A racist president.
Absolutely. I mean,
openly.
And we see every day, again, there's so much news to keep up on. You see people that have been put in key positions in the country are people that use the N-word, are people that are sympathizing. Look what happened in Charlottesville a year ago.
Well, but they arrested 4 people for conspiracy and riot yesterday, today actually, as part of that case that's being brought about Charlottesville. But the Consumer Financial Protection Board of the United States, the policy director is a guy named Eric Blankenstein, who wrote a blog calling most hate crimes are hoaxes.
Yes,
and
using the N-word.
He asked, is the N-word really inherently racist? And then there's the gratuitous attack on gay diplomats, which is now getting a lot of condemnation. If you're a foreign diplomat here, you've been allowed under Secretary Clinton, since 2009, you've been allowed to bring in your domestic partner on a visa. Now they're saying you got to get married, but for a lot of these people, if they get married, it's a public thing. They could get killed in their own countries for this. We talked about it a little last week, but at least it's getting a lot of attention. And then the stuff with the migrant children at the border, more was exposed about that. How can we even tolerate this as a society and look ourselves in the mirror?
You would think that our system of government was set up so that you would have an independent legislative branch, a Congress, that regardless of if their party was occupying the Oval Office, they would do meaningful insight and be a real check on the executive. That's what the separation of powers were about. That's what the judiciary is about. And what we've seen, as you said at the beginning, is an erosion of democratic and societal norms. Yes. The way he speaks about the press, the way he is stacking the courts with people who are ideologues, the way that you have a Congress that is completely and totally subservient to him. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan basically do whatever he wants.
They're afraid of his base.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about...
It's not the grand old party. It is the Trump party.
It was the party of Lincoln at one time.
Not anymore.
Well, let's talk about some political things. And speaking of racists, Ron DeSantis, who's the the Republican nominee in Florida for governor against Andrew Gillum, he stood on a stage with a guy named Raynard Jackson, who said the reaction to the Pulse massacre was all about just spreading the homosexual agenda, and yet he stands with people like this. But then we have what the Victory Fund is telling us, which endorses LGBT candidates. They endorsed 55 more this year. 272 out candidates that they've endorsed. That's not even the whole universe of them. How does that make you feel as a little bit of a pioneer in this field?
It's great. It's exciting. We were saying this before the show that now white men are going to be a minority of people running in the Democratic Party. If you look at the number for House seats, when you look across the country, you have a huge number of women, people of color, LGBT people. It is fantastic. I think we're going to pick up a congressional seat, a bad guy in Kansas named Kevin Yoder, with this lesbian Native American woman named Sharice Davids, who is going to pick up this red seat, a lesbian in Kansas who's a Native American. Right. I think Tammy Baldwin is going to be reelected in Wisconsin.
I just got back from Wisconsin.
Yes.
I was there this weekend.
You're in Wisconsin.
I have an old friend there from college, and I finally visited her and went to Minneapolis as well because they were across the river. And I saw there, you don't see it as much here in New York. They have lawn signs, competing lawn signs.
Yes.
Most I saw were for Tammy. I saw, and then of course Scott Walker's running for re-election. I saw some of those as well. But they are pouring so much money in there against her to try to knock her off.
I think the Koch brothers have put more in the Wisconsin Senate race against Tammy Baldwin than any race across the country. And I think Kirsten Sinema is going to win, who's openly bisexual in Arizona.
Yes, and she's a Democratic moderate, but she's out as a bisexual bisexual. But in Wisconsin, they've got this woman, Leah Vukmir,
Yes.
who has consistently voted against LGBT rights. She voted against, and she even voted not to curb bullying in the schools. You know, that's the kind of people that we're talking about. But they really are trying to knock off. Now, and I meant we've followed in Massachusetts that they've got this transgender rights are the law. But the right wing put a ballot initiative on it. Now your mom's there in Massachusetts. What's the feeling that you're getting about this referendum in Massachusetts? Whether we can hold on to the law there?
I think we'll hold on. You know, the polling was not good. Not that I believe all the polls, but the polling was not good earlier this year on this. Back in I think April, it showed it very, very close. The most recent polling I saw from a few weeks ago showed it to be overwhelmingly people wanting to uphold an anti-discrimination statute protecting transgender people on gender identity and expression.
Okay.
But these things you never know, and it's why, really, civil rights should not be up for a vote. It shouldn't be put on the ballot.
It's not allowed in Washington, D.C. You're not allowed to vote on human rights laws.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be able to.
We shouldn't be able to do it.
No.
I mean, we won marriage equality in certain places after losing for years and years and years with anti-gay constitutional amendments in those states. And we won because the public opinion had shifted in our direction. But if you have a vulnerable, marginalized class of individuals, and to put that on the ballot, where you're going to have the majority saying what the minority's rights and protections should be, that doesn't make sense to me.
Romania is going to be voting on this on Friday and Saturday of this week because they have to get 30% of the people to the polls, so they can't change the Constitution. Romania, my people, I'm embarrassed to say, but that's going to be voted on. But the Constitutional Court this week in Romania said you got to give these people the same rights as everybody else. The same rights. It didn't say they had to do marriage. It said you had to give them the same rights. So it's conflicting. And anyway, we'll get to that in international news. It was nice to see the Congress. They had an appropriations bill, and the right wing wanted to put an amendment in it that said you can let people discriminate and these child care agencies, right, or child placement agencies, and it was gotten rid of in conference because we still have 49 Democratic senators who can say we're going to stop this and we're not going to let this go through. What else?
You know it's not good when you take small victories like that.
Well, that's the thing. We can stop some things.
Yeah, but we can't do anything proactive.
No, not in the Congress.
But everyone still needs to vote and get out there and door knock and phone bank and be an activist participant in our democracy. I think we're going to take the House.
Yes.
And I don't know about the Senate, but I think we're going to take the House. I'm most worried about Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota.
Right.
But I think the other seats, I think Joe Donnelly in Indiana is going to hold on. I think we're going to beat Dean Heller in Nevada with Jackie Rosen, the congresswoman there. I think Kyrsten Sinema is going to beat Martha McSally.
How about Tennessee?
I think that Phil Bredesen is going to win, the Democrat.
And other people have to hold it.
I want Beto O'Rourke, of course, to beat Ted Cruz.
How about Claire McCaskill in Missouri?
I think Claire's going to hold on. The one I'm most worried about is Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. But North Dakota has something that other states don't have. Do you know this?
Nope.
There's no voter registration.
You just show up.
You just show up.
Can't we do that in New York?
You just show up. There's no voter registration.
Speaker?
So it's hard to poll there because the way people typically poll is you look at the voter rolls, you go through and you find likely voters, how often they vote, and you weight it in a certain way and screen it in a certain way and create a model.
Right.
In North Dakota, there's no voter registration. You just show up. And you vote. And it's a Republican-controlled state, a Republican governor, Republican supermajorities in the state legislature, and no one's screaming about voter fraud in North Dakota.
Can we do these kinds of reforms here in New York?
That's what I think is one of the biggest things that we have to do if Democrats when they take the state Senate. We need to do automatic voting registration, no excuse absentee voting, all sorts of voting reforms, early voting.
I'm a lifelong Democrat,
yes,
but I've never seen Democrats too interested in this because, you know, a lot of politicians just want the electorate that elected them. They don't want a new electorate. They don't want to worry about that. Australia, you have to vote or you get a fine.
Yeah, it's compulsory,
It is. Now, all right, here's another story out of San Francisco. They say that they're the first city to have an LGBTQ cultural strategy to protect cultural heritage sites in the city and also to preserve them and to empower LGBTQ residents through economic programs and social services and things. I mean, now, of course, course, we've preserved some sites in New York, but how do you think we're doing on that in New York?
I think we need to do better. We just voted last week in the City Council to appoint or confirm the mayor's appointment to a Landmarks Preservation Commission chair. And it's a woman named Sarah Carroll. And I had conversations with her about identifying more LGBT cultural sites. If you look at one of the oldest bars in the city where the famous sip-in took place, Julius, it's not protected as an individual cultural landmark. It's in the Greenwich Village Historic District, but it doesn't have its own recognition. And there's a great guy named Ken Lusbader who has put forward this plan on identifying LGBT cultural and historic sites in New York City, like the brownstone that GMHC was founded in. All of these important places that you were around for it, the Gay Activists Alliance Firehouse, which...
I never got to the firehouse. I couldn't find it. It was on Worcester Street. I couldn't find it on a map. It's terrible. I was a kid.
So we have to
found my way to some gay bars and other places.
We have to protect more of these places, and I'm glad San Francisco is doing it. I think two of the cities with the largest cultural history in the United States are San Francisco and New York because of what happened in the early days of the movement.
You know, I love the way London preserves lots of what they call heritage sites, like a local pub, so that a neighborhood still has an anchor, and we've never been able to do that in New York. But maybe
we have to do a better job of it.
Someday. All right. Here's a story out of St. Petersburg, Florida. Am I jumping? Oh, well, maybe we should do the Dean LaFleur story. We really should. Let's talk about Dean LaFleur. There he is. This picture. That's an old picture of him when he was in the service. Now, all right. They don't give the name of his partner. Dean had a commitment ceremony. His partner said, come on, let's have a commitment ceremony. It's 2003. We can't get married. Let's have a commitment ceremony. Oh, come on. He agrees to this, all right? They break up. Like people do. And they had an off-again, on-again relationship. But then the ex-partner comes after him and says, we were really married back in 2003, and I want a divorce settlement. I want a divorce, and I want a settlement. And this judge in Colorado granted this. They said it's not a common law marriage, but you shared the common necessities of life. And after all, the anti-gay marriage statute was declared unconstitutional. You're married. He had to get a divorce, and he had to pay a settlement. The guy wanted, like, 2/3 of his he didn't get that much. But wow, I'm not sure. I mean, the guy never thought he was getting married.
Well, I think that's the key thing here, is the guy never thought he was getting married.
And he wasn't legally at the time.
And he wasn't legally married. I don't know enough about the specifics except you just told me, but that's a little scary.
Well, and he's looking for somebody to help him with an appeal. Now, we are trying some retro things. We talked about it on the show last week. A woman who wants spousal Social Security benefits for her partner who died before you could get married. So, these things are going to have to be worked out. Anyway, no good deed goes unpunished. Another Catholic here's another Catholic, worker who worked for the Archdiocese. He worked for outreach for the Archdiocese. He liked some same-sex marriage photos on Facebook. They brought him in and they fired him. And he wasn't out at the time, but this was enough to get him fired.
Where was this, Cleveland?
This was Cleveland, Ohio.
That is terrible.
Be careful what you like, but and he is now out. But there was another case. I'll find it later where in Chicago there was this organist who sued because he was fired because he was gay. And they said he can't do that because they have a ministerial exception for that. But they do seem to have violated the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, because they went after you because you're overweight. And so he's allowed to pursue the case on that basis. All right. And we had a little racism incident at the Monster Bar.
Yes.
Which used to be an advertiser on the show 100 years ago, where they used to advertise that there was no heterophobia there. Well, there does seem to be racism. The manager there was caught texting that, don't send that flyer out. People will think it's Black Night.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And you spoke out against this. Well, and they fired the guy.
They fired the guy, and one of the people who was trying to promote a night at the Monster put these men, I think, I don't know, one was African American, one was Latino, maybe most of them were African American, I don't know. They looked handsome, like handsome men to me.
Right.
And the general manager said in a series of text messages, I don't want this to be black night, that's not what this is about. And then when the guy went to the owner and said
it's bad for business.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Terrible. Unacceptable. And I'm glad they fired him, but
They didn't want to at first, but they did. They realized
and this is literally, Andy, for people that aren't in New York City, this is a stone's throw away from the Stonewall.
Well,
right on Christopher Street, like right off Christopher Street.
We had the case a couple of years ago. Remember when the lesbian was thrown out of the women's restroom because she looked too mannish?
Oh, at Caliente Cab Company.
We had to picket the damn place.
Yes, at
and it's,
Caliente
again,
Cab Company.
a stone's throw from the Stonewall.
Yes.
So, you know, these things never end, even here in New York, and we're always ready to fight if we're... But in Texas, Governor Abbott, the Republican, tried to soft pedal his support for a bathroom bill there. So that's not my priority while he's running. But I think if he gets, he's running against an open lesbian, Lupe Valdez. Now
who was the sheriff for the county of Dallas, right?
I did read that the Governor Abbott has $50 million more than Valdez does. But if it's a wave election... Well, you're not optimistic about that one.
I'm not optimistic about Lupe Valdez, but I'm optimistic about multiple House seats in Texas, which I think we're going to pick up.
All right.
And I'm semi-optimistic about Beto O'Rourke. I really want him to win.
Yeah.
Really want him to win.
Yeah. And we had a court victory in North Carolina. They had the horrible bathroom bill, right? HB 2. They got rid of that. They put in the substitute one, which was bad. And the federal court just ruled that you can't bar trans people from using public facilities. It's an ACLU case. But the law still says localities can't pass ordinances that protect us. So,
see, the thing that I'm confused about the state legislature doing that in North Carolina, saying municipalities
and
can't.
other places, Arkansas.
But the case, which it all comes back to Judge Kavanaugh and Anthony Kennedy, Romer v. Evans.
Yeah.
Which was a case in Colorado in the 1990s.
Yes.
Where the state legislature said...
the state legislature said you can't pass any kind of law in the state protecting us. And the Supreme Court said, you are making gay people strangers to the political process. They at least have to be able to go to the legislature and say this is what we want and be able to try to do it.
This seems similar to me in some way.
It has elements of it, but, you know.
And, you know, all these, not to bring it back to Kavanaugh, I'm so disappointed at Anthony Kennedy for leaving us in this situation. Though he was bad on many issues.
36,
Citizens
he's
United,
83.
Citizens United and the Muslim ban and so many other issues that he was not great on. He was good on gay stuff, but that was kind of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, all these cases that we're talking about, all these important laws we're talking about could all be in jeopardy if you have Judge Brett Kavanaugh as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
Unless we expand the court. Expand the court. That's the
hashtag.
And Governor Brown in California has signed a raft of legislation for gay parents. He did one requiring police to be trained on LGBT issues. He signed the Homeless Youth Act, but he vetoed a bill to give teachers and school staff the tools and training to support LGBTQ students. And he said it doesn't give the schools enough flexibility. But here in New York, this is the new brochure that is available to students and teachers. And
do you know who deserves credit for this?
Who?
Danny Drum, someone who you know, my colleague in the city council, represents a district in Queens. I jokingly, affectionately call him the Queen from Queens.
Okay.
And he is a city councilman who now chairs our finance committee, but before chaired the education committee. As you know, he was a teacher who came out. It became a big controversy, and he has dedicated the last 10 years of his time in the council to protecting LGBT students as a former teacher. And so, Danny, on the back of this, there's the name of the gentleman, great guy, Jared Fox, who works at the Department of Education. Danny's the one that got the funding from the city council to create the position for Jared Fox to do all of this work.
Right.
So I think Danny actually watches Gay USA. So, Danny, thank you.
And There's now a toolkit for educators called Understanding LGBTQ Plus Identity, and it features videos that were developed by WNET, of all places, from their groundbreaking series on LGBT people called First Person. It has a teacher's guide, an early grades guide, a Gay Straight Alliance checklist, because any school in New York or anywhere in the country that wants to have a GSA can have them, But that
was a court case too.
Yes. But you put some resources into New York to fund these. But apparently we only have about 15% GSAs in our high schools for whatever reason. Maybe because the whole city is gay.
But I don't know. No, but that's what Jared Fox, who is doing this work, he's working to get more GSAs in schools across the city.
If you want to see this toolkit, sign up for our email. Go to gayusatv.org, sign up for our email. I'll send you the link. All right? Or you can Google around for it, but the URL is too long for us to put in. All right. I'm just trying to see what else. University of California, Berkeley opened up a large-scale universal locker room that the students voluntarily paid their fees for, $146 a piece, so that they could open this facility where you can shower in private and the transgender people are comfortable, where people with disabilities are comfortable. It's a fantastic thing.
That's great.
Meridian, Idaho passed a non-discrimination ordinance 4-2. It's the 14th city in Idaho to do so.
Meridian, Idaho.
Well, it took us until 1986 to do it in New York. We were the first city to have a bill and one of the last big cities to pass it, because as you know, this can be a kind of conservative city in some respects.
That is right.
Although you're getting votes on LGBT issues about, you only get about 4 or 5 dissenters now,
Yeah, it's
right?
not really controversial anymore, at least in the city council anymore. I mean, hey, they elected me, and openly gay, openly HIV positive guy.
And there was Speaker Quinn, who was
Speaker
now
Quinn,
lesbian,
exactly.
And
that was in 2005.
All right. Speaking of schools, Indiana University, a federal court ruled that the First Amendment does not protect a tenured professor who has been making sexist, racist, homophobic, and Islamophobic classroom comments. This Jean Poulard, a poli-sci professor, for 30 years, said black people were ruining Chicago, proposed weekly hangings. I swear to, this is the kinds of things and then
At Indiana University?
At the Northwest chapter, and thought that he was protected, but they said, this is a bit much, and you're gone. Let's see. I told you about the organist. Where are we in Chicago? It's 2 very disturbing murders in Rogers Park in Chicago. One was of a 73-year-old gay man, Douglas Watts, 73, and the other was to a very visibly Jewish guy who worked in the city there, Eliyahu Moskowitz, both shot with single bullets in the head from the same gun within 48 hours of each other. They suspect a hate crime. They don't know.
Terrible.
Anyway, all right. Some international news. We got some more time here.
International
Let's go
news.
around the world.
Around the world.
Switzerland changed the penal code to make discrimination against us illegal, both sexual orientation and gender identity.
I'm surprised it's taken so long for Switzerland.
They didn't let women vote until the 70s.
I didn't know that.
I think it's something like that.
Wow.
It was very late. Somebody will correct me there. Canada is going to let college athletes play on teams consistent with their gender identities.
Good.
Singapore, 45,000 people signed a petition saying that they want to get rid of the criminalization of gay sex. And the government said, we don't have any plans to do that. An India court ruled that a lesbian couple can live together. This woman alleged that her partner had been held hostage by her family. And the court said, no, they can live together. You got to stop that. We got a picture of these rival hockey Olympians who got married. Megan Duggan from Team USA and Jillian Apps from Team Canada. They played, they played for different teams, but they married in Maine. They're not the first rivals on hockey teams to marry Olympians.
Where'd they get married, in Maine?
They got married in Maine.
Maine is a hockey state.
The first ones were former U.S. Captain Julie Chu, who married former Canadian Captain Carolyn Ouellette. All right. The Secretary General of the UN spoke out for gay rights this week. That was good to see.
Yes.
It was the first time that a Secretary General had spoken to the gay group there, the LGBTI core group. And of course,
That was the first time ever?
To the core group. I mean, the previous Ban Ki-moon spoke to some conferences about. Yes, they both were speaking out about the issue, but not to this group. And then the Michelle Bachelet, who's the UN human rights chief, spoke more fully about that. But back in her home country of Chile, she was trying to pass the marriage equality and all that kind of stuff in Chile, and they held it up. And the current government is trying to block it. Even though a majority of the parliament is for it, the executive branch is against it. So the Inter-American Commission there, which has been ordering everybody to do this in Latinx America, is saying, come on, what are you doing? Well, you're holding things up. Okay. I told you about Romania. In Beijing, a gay kindergarten teacher is suing over his firing. It's a landmark suit, and the court has accepted the case. He wants to raise the visibility of gay rights. And in Russia, the invasion of Crimea has driven LGBT life underground there. I told you about the United Kingdom, where Theresa May has come out for equal civil partnerships for straight people, which they didn't have.
Yeah.
All right? But a conservative MP there says, if you really want to make things equal, what about covering elderly siblings who live together and support each other? And then one of them dies and they got to sell the house because they got to pay all these estate taxes. It's something to think about.
I'm not opposed to that. I think, you have to protect people, and people aren't saying they're married. They're basically saying they're cohabitants
and
who
they support each other,
who are financially entangled, and we want to make sure they're protected.
Right. Okay. In France, a committee on bioethics backs now in vitro fertilization for women in same-sex couples and single women. And the president said that he wants the government to change the law. All right, in Zimbabwe, now here's the thing. This teacher at the elite St. John's College, it's a prep school, right? There he is, all right? His name is Dr. Neil Hubelmeyer. And he came out because he was speaking to an assembly to tackle homophobic bullying. It was a forum for parents, right? And he said, look, I'm gay. Ooh. Fist fights broke out in the audience over this. Parents got furious. The administration backed him and said, we think he's very brave, what he's doing. But then he started getting death threats and he resigned.
That's horrible.
Because, it's always been hard for teachers to be out in classrooms, even in New York, and to some extent still. I think teachers in New York are out to their colleagues. They've been protected. Before we had a gay rights bill, the Board of Ed protected them. But nobody came out. When Danny Drum came out, that was a big deal in the 90s.
Yes.
They're mainly afraid of the power it's going to give the students over them if they come out, and they're going to be sniggering in the background. So a lot of them don't get into it as teachers. It's hard. I don't know what we could do to, it would be great if we could have more out teachers in classrooms, but I
think it's happening.
Okay. Hong Kong, the government agrees that laws targeting gay men are incompatible with basic law, but they said, please don't declare them unconstitutional. We don't want to get rid of them entirely. In Russia, LGBTQ people are saying crackdowns are worsening now in Russia under Putin. 63% of Russians believe that gay propaganda is being used to try to destroy the country's spiritual values. In South Korea, in a place called Jeju City. Do you know it? I don't know it. All right. There it is. There were these right-wing Christian activists who tried, these are the police trying to stop them from stopping the gay pride march there. And they sat down on the street to block the gay pride march and everything. And there were 2,000 people at the cultural festival and thousands more from this Christian group doing this. This is really unhinged.
Wow.
And South Korea is trying to work through this whole business of same-sex marriage, and you are part South Korean.
Yes.
I admitted to being part Romanian.
I am shocked by this. So wait.
These are the Christians
who are blocking
traffic,
the gay pride parade.
blocking the police, blocking the police cars, getting under the trucks and everything. All right, we've seen enough of that. But they are very serious about it.
Yes, I'm a quarter Korean.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit while we have time about this AIDS data that's come out from the CDC this week. The number of men who have sex with men, 13 to 29, who were diagnosed, has been still increasing 3% annually between 2008 and 2016. Larry Kramer, said that this was appalling. I see that Corey Johnson is going to get the Larry Kramer Activist Award from Gay Men's Health Crisis
Next week.
Next Tuesday.
Yes.
What do you? I mean, you've talked about the fact that rates are going down in New York, and diagnoses in New York they were 2,279 in 2016.
Yes.
Down from 6,000 in 2000.
That's a huge reduction.
Here.
So, and I think part of the reason why that has been a success is we've used all sorts of strategies, not just one strategy, multiple strategies. Pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis, still continuing to encourage people to use condoms, making sure that if you are infected, you are taking your medicine so that you're undetectable, so that it's less likely you can transmit to someone. So all of those things and putting a lot of money behind it has been a big success. I don't know if the other places where the incident rates are higher, if they're doing the same thing that we're doing here.
It's mostly the South. 9 out of the top 10 states where this is increasing are in the South, so and it's mostly among people of color.
And it's a failure of political leadership, because if you do the right thing from a budgetary and political perspective, governmentally, and you show some leadership and fund the things you need to fund and get people the access to things that they need, the rates will go down.
All right, but one of the, of course, big costs here is Truvada, which is the key drug for PrEP and PEP and for people with AIDS. $18,000 a year. It's breaking the budgets of a lot of these places.
And people want to break the patent.
Well, no, the FDA approved the generic version, but they're still fiddling around with it and Gilead is saying, well, components of the generic are things we still have patents on. This has got to be stopped.
Yes.
A year's supply overseas is $70, not $18,000, $70 overseas. The British High Court said, you got to give them a generic and cut this. Gilead, forget it. You can't have, we're going to do the generic here. Why? I mean, and Trump acted like he was going to bring costs down. His new trade bill, the new NAFTA, it's got all kinds of protections for pharmaceutical patents that are going to drive the cost of your drugs up.
Even higher.
Who's going to stand up to the pharmaceutical companies?
Well, I think that if we take the House and maybe the Senate, you're going to see a lot of pushback on all of this.
You think?
And I think
I've seen a lot of Democrats vote to protect pharmaceutical companies, including Cory Booker.
Well, hopefully it's a new
Jersey,
day.
where there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies. Well, I hope so. Anyway, you did a very moving post this week on Facebook. You should follow Corey on Facebook, Corey Johnson. You made a beautiful post about your own coming out and dealing with your HIV diagnosis years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this week, 14 years ago is when I found out that I was HIV positive. I went for a doctor's appointment and got the news, and I was shocked. I was 22 years old, and it turned my world upside down. I was filled with shame and anxiety and remorse for a long time, and that's what kicked off my drinking and drug use in a serious way. I'm now sober over 9 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But for me, it was very, very painful, and I was lucky that a community health organization called ATTRIBUTIONS, which is based in Chinatown in New York City, was there for me, and this wonderful woman named Shafali Roshwan became my caseworker and got me enrolled in the AIDS Drugs Assistance Program, which got me access to care and medicine, and that's what everyone really deserves.
You said, today I do not live in shame. For years it ate me alive.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think a lot of people can sympathize with it. In a way, it's harder to come out now about having HIV because the drugs are available and you can take care of yourself. And a lot of people don't want to be defined by a disease, or a condition, so they don't tell anybody,
You are only as sick as your secrets.
Okay.
So try not to have any.
All right. So where do you stand on this big movement to get the AIDS conference out of the United States in 2020, the International AIDS Conference? A lot of people are saying, and American activists are signing this thing and saying, this is a country that discriminates against people with HIV, against Muslims, against all kinds of people, and we shouldn't be having it here until we get our house in order.
I don't disagree with that. Okay. I think that if you want to stand up for human rights, you want to be in a place, and that's what most people at that conference are doing. You need to be in a place that really protects people. And right now in our country, we aren't doing that. We aren't living up to the values that we should be holding
Now,
up.
on the other hand, we're having Stonewall 50 here in New York,
Yes.
World Pride here next year.
Yes.
And some people are raising the same issue. I mean, that's why a lot of us, Ann and I don't know where you are on this, but we want to have a civil rights march that day, not a parade, because, and we really can't honestly invite the world. We sort of want to have a women's march, like the Women's March, which will take place all over the world at the end of June around Stonewall, because there's a lot to protest at this point. There's certainly things to celebrate over 50 years. We've all worked hard. But that's, that we don't really deserve to be the host of World Pride if this is a country which is keeping a lot of people out and all that.
I understand that, and I actually think that it would be a lot more powerful to have something for Stonewall 50 in line with the March for Our Lives, which was the gun control march, the women's marches that took place.
Let's do it.
I'm open to that.
Okay.
I don't like all the corporations having the big floats and being put up at the front of the parade ahead of everyone else.
Right.
And this past year, they were restricting people of who could march and wristbands, and that's not in the spirit of the gay rights movement and what we did.
Okay. We have a couple of minutes. We want. Thank you. We're going to do a little entertainment news. I also read on Facebook that you saw Crazy Rich Asians for the second time, and you said you cried harder. What's there to cry?
Have you seen it?
I haven't. I want to.
Oh my God, Crazy Rich Asians! It's so good. It takes place. It's about an Asian couple in New York who the son goes back home to Singapore to visit his family, and the woman who goes back with him is not accepted by his traditional, very rich family. Her name's Rachel Chu, and she is amazing and fights through it. I want to be Rachel Chu. But I need to find my Nick Young. Nick Young was the very handsome Asian guy in the film. It's so good, you have to see it. You'll like it.
Okay.
Go see it.
I will.
It's still grossing really well at the box office.
Well, we also want to talk about an out actor. We have a picture of him. His name is Jake Choi. He's on the ABC sitcom Single Parents. He's 26. He's come out as sexually fluid.
Okay.
He said he played a gay man in a 2015 film called Front Cover. He identified as straight at the time, but he started to think, I'm attracted to everything. So he's out. Anne wants us to, she's seen it, she wants to remind us about the Studio 54 documentary, which is opening in New York City on October 5th and Los Angeles on October the 12th. She says there were amazing historical footage and stills. I was not into that scene. I was a bit of a stiff. I would survive my confirmation hearing.
You were a stiff?
I would survive. I didn't drink. I can honestly say this. I did not drink until 1988, when we'd had 8 years of Ronald Reagan, and George Bush was elected, the senior was elected president. And this was in the midst of the AIDS crisis, and I was despondent.
Yes.
I said, things are not going to get any better. I'm going to have a drink. And so that's all I drink is a little wine. That's all I do. That's it for me. But I didn't drink at all before that.
So Anne wants us to watch this documentary.
Oh, she says it's excellent. And, of course, you're going to see Roy Cohn in it, but you're also going to see Rollerina.
Oh, I love Rollerina. I was telling you before we went on the air that I last night was watching clips of United in Anger and
about Act Up.
About Act Up, and Anne is very prominent in that film, and she is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love you, Ann Northrop.
We'd love to have you back, Ann.
Are you coming back?
and Corey would like to do the show with you as well.
That's not a dig on Andy. I've only done the show with Andy.
And we should have gender parity on the show.
Yes, we should.
Right? This is ridiculous. Two guys, right? Okay. Well, Corey, it's been wonderful having you. We're down to our last 43 seconds. Any final messages for the people?
No, the final message is if you're angry, if you're depressed, if you're despondent, if you're going on a news diet, if you don't want to look at the TV or the newspaper, get out there. Don't just vote. Voting's not enough.
Right.
Door knock, phone bank, get involved. We have about 30 days to change the course of this country. Let's do it.
And we're going to do it. Thank you for being with us. Don't run off.
Don't run off.
We have a couple of seconds. And if you want to be on our email list and get that toolkit for educators, go to gayusatv.org.
Thanks for doing this. This show's so good.
Well, 33 years.
33 years. I'm 36. I was 3. Damn,
But
Andy.
you weren't getting an allowance from Fred Trump of $200,000 a year when you were 3.
Oy vey.